Welcome to the God Pill. Gentlemen, this video marks the beginning of an ongoing series on prepping and survivalism. It's becoming increasingly clear the past decade that we are in for a time of great trouble. No one really needs to be a Christian to see the West is heading towards dark times. America has grown increasingly polarized. Large, violent conflicts between liberal and conservative factions of citizenry and riots have grown increasingly common in recent years, as has rhetoric of a second civil war. The duality of the current order is eroding towards one-party rule, disenfranchisement of interests that might spark conflict. This was all prophesied in the book of Isaiah. But first, I must clarify that a number of prophecies in the Old Testament are end times prophecies. Isaiah here was prophesying on the modern Egypt. Egypt was, in later generations, the domain of the Ptolemaic Empire, the first identity of the King of the South. It is acknowledged pretty widely that America is the current King of the South, the modern Egypt. The American Standard Version of Isaiah 19 verse 2 reads, "And I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight, each against another, and each against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom." Verse 4 reads, "And I will give over the Egyptians into the hand of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares Jehovah of hosts." There are chaotic and dangerous times ahead, and it is wise for us all to perform due diligence in getting ready to weather them. And so I will occasionally post videos on prepping topics, providing tips. Our first episode is on fuel, a sometimes vital resource. When the adversaries have had centuries to plan their march towards centralization of power, little is overlooked. And you will see one measure they have taken, and one simple remedy you can probably secure within the hour if stores are open. I wish you all the best outcomes in life, so without delay, let's begin. Back in the mid-2000s, at the height of environmentalism in the 21st century so far, there was a huge push for alternative energy in various fields, not the least the automotive industry. While some, like hydrogen, remain promising, there was an agenda to at least one, and that is ethanol. It affects us to this day and is something you should factor into your survival preparations if you intend to relocate or traverse distances by road in a mid or long-term crisis. First off, this was partially an economic concern. Interventionistic, light socialist farming policies in America often subsidize farming, which is always a bad thing. Artificially inflated food prices from leaving millions of crops out to rot might help a farmer's bottom line, but this kind of government policy distorts the market. Without such appalling shenanigans, the farmer would allocate his efforts towards crops where there is more natural demand for. Leave the market be. One crop that is very common in America is corn. It's one, if not the most distinctly American agricultural product globally. Sure, we produce a lot of wheat, but so does everywhere with the environment for it. But like many crops, America produces more corn than there is natural demand for globally. Yet they don't waste it the way they do oranges and others. Instead, America puts it in everything that it can argue some use for. How many products contain high fructose corn syrup? Not merely corn syrup, but corn genetically modified specifically to reduce your fertility as a man. Again, this fixation on corn wastes farmland and agricultural workers that would otherwise more optimally meet the demands for crops in the market. It gets worse, though. There was a span of time when the environmental movement was pushing ethanol, a biofuel made from corn oil. Automotive companies started making engines that could run on blends as high as 85% ethanol, and gas stations in many places were made to blend 10 to 15% ethanol into their gasoline. Now, isn't that convenient in creating artificial demand for corn? Ethanol didn't take off farther, though, partly for economic reasons. Full ethanol, or an 85% blend, would cost substantially more to the consumer than gasoline. It gets more sinister, though. This biofuel is so bad for conventional engines, automotive companies have tried to sue the government when it's attempted to push blends as low as 15%. But that's not the primary issue. The agenda of ethanol lies somewhere else entirely. And this is the issue you must take into account when preparing for the worst. Pure gasoline has a shelf life of 2 years, though there's slight variation based on the octane. Ethanol, however, causes gasoline to degrade. A 10% ethanol blend will be unusable in just 6 months. There is no way this is a coincidence. It serves the interest of both the oligarchs and the government. It means a retailer must sell and replenish their inventory of fuel in a shorter time window, further enriching the oil companies. But the demand in the market's high enough that's not a primary factor. The primary motive is power. It weakens American civilians' long-term freedom of movement in the supply chain disruption of a situation of prolonged conflict, whether foreign or domestic. It would be a shame if you needed to go somewhere and the gas in your reserve of fuel cans had expired and there was no readily available supply. Make no mistake, the globalists want to cripple your mobility. In France, they intend to outlaw the internal combustion engine entirely by 2030. This is only one small aspect of preparing for hockey mask time, but it's nevertheless empowering to have a solution that quadruples the duration of fuel's utility. And again, they do not want people stockpiling fuel. Earlier in 2020, diminished consumption of gasoline from coronavirus quarantines caused the price of oil to plummet so far it went past free. The oil companies were literally paying companies to take the surplus off their hands. Many enterprising individuals with means of storage researched accessing these barrels that were being distributed and found the companies wouldn't distribute to those that weren't connected. If your circumstances permit you to store gasoline, absolutely do so. There's safety in numbers, and if your survival group or tribe is large, a convoy is going to require a supply. Share this advice with your allies. Even if you are well fortified where you are and don't intend to relocate or travel, during a long-term crisis, for the duration of its shelf life, gasoline is an asset with high utility that you can use to barter with others. Ultimately, if the days were not cut short, no flesh would be saved. No preparation will be enough to save man from the forces of the adversary. But when we look out for ourselves and others, when we put our efforts in enduring the coming storm, we show respect to the life-giver as we await his saving acts. If you found this content worthwhile, don't hesitate to like, share, subscribe, donate, and comment. Until next time, fellas, remember, a man who does not plan long ahead will find trouble at his door.